In fact, we're in, again, a moment just before Project 2025 will be implemented, and people like myself, people who are on the streets demonstrating for Palestine, will be recommended for deportation, among many other things. But of course, I guess I'm using that as a shield. I don't know, according to you. But I did want to.
Francesca Fiorentini of the Bitchuation Room had Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks on. I mean, technically, I think she's part of that network as well, to talk about sort of, quote, what he's doing recently, because trying to encapsulate this briefly, he's a longtime YouTuber, populist. Recently, he's been talking about this new right-wing populism and building a coalition and going on right-wing sources, and it has people on the left, many people on the left sort of freaking out, including Francesca. So this is one of several videos I've done on this subject. In the clip today, she's going to be talking about who is the establishment, what is this right-wing populism, and really drilling in with him on what specifically he thinks he's doing. I want to watch this with you. I'm going to comment as we go, and then I want to know what you think in the comments section. But let's take a listen together now.
I did want to ask, Cenk, before this, I want to ask you about who the establishment is in your mind. Who is the establishment and who is not the establishment?
Great question. So Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom, all the corporate Democrats who take corporate PAC money, serve their corporate donors 100%, lie to us 24/7, never intend to do any progressive policy positions, never intend to do any democratic policy positions that they state in campaigns, and are backed by the liars in mainstream media, pretending that they're on our side when they're playing good cop, bad cop with establishment Republicans and robbing us blind on behalf of their donors.
Do you think that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are establishment?
So they're complicated. The reason they're complicated is because they act like the establishment. They do the same robberies, the same corporate tax cuts, but they are pretending to be populists. And that's why I've called Donald Trump a fake populist hundreds of times, right? And I've called him a fake populist on right-wing shows. And I've said, hey, watch out for your own donors on right-wing shows, right? And so, but they're not part of this the machine that was the Borg. Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden were the co-captains of the Borg, and that machine was unstoppable. And that machine was, maintains corporate rule, and that's my mortal enemy. That Borg is the one we should all be fighting against.
So do you think it's less bad that one person donates $277 million to a candidate versus 5 people donating $277 million to a candidate? Elon Musk gave $277 million to Donald Trump and is now, again, worth $400 billion. Is that somehow less establishment in your mind?
So there's 2 parts of it, Franny. One is they at least talk the populist game, and the advantage of that is that also spread through the right-wing base. That, hey, them faking populism, remember, the people that are hearing that message don't realize it's fake, right? Mm-hmm. So they're talking anti-war, they're talking anti-corporate. You see Tucker Carlson talking anti-corporate. You see Steve Bannon saying we should increase corporate taxes. That doesn't mean Steve Bannon is an angel, but what it does mean, or anywhere near it, but what it does mean is that idea of populism and anti-establishment, et cetera, is spreading throughout the right wing. That is an amazing opportunity for us to actually coalesce on economic populism that they now believe in, even if their leader doesn't, right? So that's point 1, and it's super important. Point 2 is, in some ways, that individual corruption is worse, and in some ways it's better. So how is it worse? So Miriam Adelson gives, $137 million to Trump, and Sheldon Adelson had given him $200 million in previous campaigns. So he delivers foreign policy to the Adelson family, right?
Right.
Moved our embassy in his first term. Now he's thinking about allowing the annexation of northern Gaza and the West Bank. And you saw me fight tooth and nail against Trump, because that's what I was really, really worried about, that he's going to go and be extreme and radical to serve his top donors. On Elon, he handed all of domestic policy to him. So that's how it's worse. How in the world could it be at the same time a little bit better? Well, the way that it's better is that it's not a machine. It's chaotic. So it's one guy here and another person there, but the other person disagrees with Miriam. And then Trump doesn't quite know what to do. And he listens to the last person in the room, but he also kind of listens to his base. We've got chaos there. And chaos is way better than a machine. A machine is ruthless and just steamrolls you.
So I think that's
worse than the McConnell-Biden era. Nothing worse.
Okay, I do want to talk about the McConnell-Biden era and establishment a little bit more, but just on that, I feel like my very first question to you is, well, what are you doing? I feel like that's the most cogent answer I've gotten from you that I could sort of get on board with, which is exploit the chaos to turn MAGA against Trump. Even if you wanted to do that, I'm not sure you're achieving it through the kinds of interviews that you're doing and the way that you're playing to the right, especially when you go on those stages and hit the left more than you do the right. But I just want to leave that there. I accept the hey, let's, plant the booby traps so that we can make them fall into them later, that kind of thing. That makes the most sense to me, even if I sort of strategically disagree with it. I want to talk about the establishment, though, and Mitch McConnell. So, for example, Mitch McConnell, who I am no fan on, obviously, believes that there should not be recess appointments for the Trump administration. Would you say that that is establishment, ergo you are anti that and anti-establishment?
Mitch McConnell is against recess appointments.
Yes.
So that one's a super tough one because sometimes the establishment will block something. Like if Bernie was president and he wanted to put in Stephanie Kelton as Treasury Secretary, I actually would disagree with that. But I put that as an example. The establishment would say no way, and it would block it with everything.
But I think this is part of the sticky thing. It isn't black and white, right? He in another video he talks about there being two spectrums. There's sort of a left-right spectrum and a progressive spectrum. And I'm like, it's really not that simple. I think instead of thinking of it as a linear line, like an x-axis, x-y-axis, it's a color wheel, right? It's a huge, diverse cloud of different points and reducing it to, well, you're either on this side of the line or you're on that side of the line, in some ways fundamentally misunderstands the problem. I understand it's a convenient way to talk about it. There is a scenario where I would say, Bernie, do a recess appointment, right? And so on the other hand, if Bernie came in and said, I don't care about advice and consent of the Senate, I'm just going to do everyone as a recess appointment, I would say, no, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not a good idea.
Why? Because it's anti-democratic. Was that?
Yeah, the core of so, Franny, the core of the question is, when we talk about the system, what do we mean by the system? Because there's two different systems that people refer to, and then they conflate them. The system we want to protect is democracy, the Constitution, civil rights, etc. That's the system that we love and believe in. The system we do not want to protect and we want to fight against is donor money, establishment, protecting the status quo, protecting corporate rule. So separate those two things out, because the permanent system of the Constitution and democracy is great. The current system of corruption and establishment rule is horrible.
Yeah. Do you understand that the right actually just conflates those two things?
I think the left often conflates those two things too.
Well, okay, so you would be in favor of Donald Trump doing recess appointments, or you wouldn't in this case?
So if he's doing blanket recess appointments, I'm against it. I always think shoe on the other foot. That's why I brought up Bernie Sanders. In order to be fair, hey, how would I feel if it was the other way around? If he does one or two, I understand it as a matter of philosophy.
Okay.
But if he does a recess appointment, I'm very likely to be against that particular person, like a Kash Patel or Pete Hegseth. He's going to do recess appointments on the most radical culture warrior stuff that I hate. I hate when the right does culture war stuff. I don't love it when the left does it, but I certainly hate it when the right does it. And so I'm worried about his recess appointments because of the people, the specific people that he's likely to do them with.
Again, though, this sort of assumes that everybody's playing by the rules, right? I mean, Trump in particular, but the right, Mitch McConnell, establishment or otherwise, the right wing in our country talks as though they're playing by the rules and will sometimes they won't be able to get something done because it's so flagrantly in violation of the rules, but they have always been working on dismantling the rules. So they keep talking as though they're playing by the same rules, but they're not. Democrats continue to follow the rules, and Republicans are in a knife fight, and they're winning. And what my fear for this upcoming term is, they're going to do what has happened like in Germany and other places throughout history, is you basically dismantle the rules, right?
Those things also, in terms of this establishment and anti-establishment sort of framework that you're using, is also Project 2025 and Russell Vogt, who he just appointed to be the head of the Office of Management and Budget. Russell Vogt would like to fire federal workers, replace them with loyalists. He also wants to use the military to target political dissidents. This is all obviously in Project 2025 that he helped to author. Is that establishment or anti-establishment? There's nothing more anti-establishment than firing a bunch of federal workers. Do you believe that that's a populist thing to do?
No, it's fake populism. And so it's so alluring to the MAGA base because they feel like, oh, we're fighting against the government, right? But what I'm trying to get them to understand is, like, you guys, they think that the government is a blanket bad thing. And so the story I often tell on these shows is the one that Matt Stoller does, great progressive, done great anti-monopoly work in the Senate, et cetera, which is, hey, what size pipe should I get? And people always ask, and that's why Matt does it this way, well, what job are you doing? It depends. And that's exactly the point that I make to these right-wingers. Do we want big government or little government? Well, it depends, right? Are we invading Iraq? Then I want smaller government, right? Are we going to invade doctors' offices and get between a woman and a doctor? Then I want smaller government, right? But if we're going to protect the average American from the bankers, then I want a little bit larger government. I don't want
That's actually, I appreciate him saying that, and I can agree with that, right? If we want universal health care, we want bigger government. I think that applies to education, the post office, and a number of things that most people would agree with.
Want to defund the police on Wall Street, right? So I explained that, hey, if you fire people that are at the IRS, guess who's it's going to help the most? The very rich who cheat on their taxes.
But they all want to audit the Pentagon, which the IRS doesn't do. But it's very interesting that, you got everyone to cheer auditing the Pentagon. But of course, the idea of auditing billionaires, the Republicans are absolutely against that because they've been trying to defund the IRS. Exactly.
Right. And remember, again, there's different layers of right wing now. There's their leaders who are almost, uniformly full of crap. Then there's, a middle bureaucracy, and then there's the voters. And the voters, and Franny, you don't have to trust me on this because those MAGA guys, they will tell you exactly what they think. They're not holding anything back. They have no need to lie to you.
Yeah, they've been telling us for many, many years.
Yeah. So they're also not lying when they say they're anti-war, anti-corruption. They might have been misdirected, but they're not lying. So what I'm trying to get them to see is firing the federal workers is not the answer.
Yeah.
Cutting the Pentagon is part of the answer.
Yeah.
And so when they say yes to cutting the Pentagon, they're not lying. The MAGA voters actually want to cut the Pentagon.
What do you think?
Is a completely different question. And so one more thing that's super important, though, it's not a booby trap, Franny. I understand what you're saying, and that's one way to frame it. But in my mind, when you have people who actually agree, you're not tricking them. You're just getting them to see, guys, you wanted to cut the Pentagon, but look, your leaders didn't cut the Pentagon. So do you see how they led you astray? Right? I'm actually getting them to I'm just showing them that their leaders are not doing the things that they promised. On the other hand, sometimes Trump responds to his base. So if that base gets angry enough and says, hey, let's cut the Pentagon, maybe Trump does cut the Pentagon, where Biden never would, McConnell never would. In the Biden-McConnell era, the Pentagon's only going to get increased forever and ever and ever. Corruption is always going to increase forever and ever and ever.
I mean, wait, just on this.
The advantage for us is that he likes to be popular. He just doesn't know how. So
sure.
Most of what Cenk was saying was a little bit muddy to me until he got to that example that he used, what size pipe should I get, and parsing out on issue by issue a way in which you might talk and resonate with some voters who are incensed about particular, kind of common sense, ultimately centrist issues and vote right for whatever reason. They go on. This is an hour-long conversation. You can find it on the channel, The Bitchuation Room with Francesca Fiorentini. It goes on for 2 hours. It's a long conversation. I've been doing it in pieces. They do have a long segment on Cenk's views of this idea of a new MAGA. That's pretty interesting. There's some other stuff. But I want to know, in terms of this one, I want to know what you think in the comments.